The history of the family's involvement in business machines is almost as old as business machines themselves. William Seward Burroughs was the inventor of the adding machine, and his fast developing company, Burroughs Limited, was where my father first worked. He got a job there as a technician. He was quite a clever mechanical engineer, and so he worked in Burroughs originally in London office, and then during the war he worked in southeast of England, keeping the army pays and banks going with the machinery at that time. So he had a long involvement then. After the war, my father decided to move to Australia, and he came out here with his family, with me of course, and worked for Burroughs in Sydney office, and he was responsible at that time for most of the bigger clients, the Burroughs clients. In those days, immediately after the war, there was a shortage of new product because most of these companies were involved in war production of guns and things like that. So there was a dire shortage of business machines. So keeping the old machines going became more and more important, and that's how it all started. One of our major people that was using Burroughs equipment at that time was David Jones, the shopping centre people, and they're quite an old business, of course, David Jones, and at that time they were one of Burroughs' largest customers. They approached my father to go and work for them permanently instead of working for Burroughs and doing their machines. And he declined to do that, but he did have an inkling that he wanted to start his own business. So he went to David Jones and said, "Look, I will do your machines as a priority, but I want to start my own company," which he did, and that was the birth of Goodson. Dad was in his late 30s when he first decided to start Goodson. The reason that he named the business Goodson, because our name is Sale, it was a more difficult name to have as a trading name. Two of Dad's old business partners in Burroughs in London had already started a business reconditioning Burroughs equipment, and they were a fellow called Goodwin and a fellow called Pearson. So they combined the Goodwin and Pearson and got Goodson. Dad had some contact with them because he needed to import parts and machines from England. So he asked if they could use the name in Australia, which they were quite happy with. So he used the name Goodson, and our first office was actually in the State shopping block, which is very close to David Jones, because of course David Jones was our major client in those times. So growth was fairly slow because you couldn't get a constant supply of stock. It was more a shortage of stock than it was a shortage of customers at that time. So the growth for that reason was slow. He had an office girl at the time, and then ultimately put on another technician to do the servicing. Most of the work was done in our garage at Bankstown, so I used to go in there and earn pocket money from at night or on Saturdays, because Dad was rebuilding the machines in the garage. So it was very easy for me, and of course it gave me a taste and a knowledge of the machines at that time. So I quite enjoyed doing that. When I left school, my dad had visions of me being a technician at Goodson as well. The problem was that I wouldn't make a technician's bootlace, unfortunately, and he sent me out to service machines. I'd take them apart and grease and oil them, and then I couldn't get them back together again. So at that time I used to come back with the machine under my arm in bits and say to Dad, look, they've decided to buy a new one. And he would say, listen, that's a perfectly good machine. Why do they need a new? I said, I don't know, they just wanted to buy a new one. At that stage I had no idea that I had the sales skills. So anyway, Dad had to then arrange for somebody to supply new machines so we could sell new machines, which we did. And as I continued to service machines and bring them back in bits, so our sale of new machines increased. Eventually Dad got pretty sick of this and said, look, I think you better go and get a job somewhere else. So I got the sack and left Goodson's and went to Hills Hoist selling rotary clotheslines. Shortly after that, about 3 months after that, the company that Dad was buying the new machines from rang up and said, look, you're not buying any new machines anymore, what's happened? And Dad said, well, look, that was my stupid son and he's no longer here. So they said, well, look, can we get in touch with him? And which they did, offered me a job in their sales department, and I worked there for about 5 years. So that was my introduction. Then I went to England with them because they were bought out by an English company at the time, Roneo. After I came back from England, I wanted to get involved in selling new machines, and Dad and I had a talk, and there was an office next to the existing Goodson office which we rented, and I started selling new machines, and that's how my involvement got started. I'm not sure what makes a salesperson. I guess I just had a natural flair for it. I enjoyed doing it. I liked the machines and I liked dealing with people. I've always been accused of talking a lot, so I just love sales, and I enjoyed the job immensely. And this also gave us an expansion factor, because having now arranged to sell new machines, we arranged with boroughs to sell their adding machines and cash registers. So I was now out selling those, and as we sold more and more of them, we started to put on sales people, and at that time we built up to about 5 salespeople selling the Citizen equipment. So, I went to Japan in '69 looking for a product to sell, because we were just at that point needing to start importing our own products. And Citizen Watch Company from Japan had started to make some beautiful adding machines and cash registers. So I went to Japan and spoke with them, and luckily for me they decided to give us the agency for Australia. It's interesting that we still today are the sole Australian agents for Citizen business machines, but at that time we sold their adding machines, and we sold lots of them, and the business grew exponentially from there. The beauty of that was that the computers were coming. So Dad was a mechanical engineer with the bookkeeping machines, and we could see that it was going to phase out. One of the things that was good, because we were importing and selling an exclusive brand, as we were with the Citizen, we were then responsible for all the spare parts and service and warranty and so on. So Dad's knowledge became enormously valuable, and we were very strong in the service area. In fact, that was one of our big advantages, that we were able to service and instruct people on the product.
In come the dollars and in come the cents to replace the pounds and the shillings and the pence. Be prepared, folks, when the coins begin to mix on the 14th of February 1966.
It's February 66 when Australia went to decimal currency. There just wasn't enough new machines available for everybody to replace their machines, and nor did they want to, because it was an expensive exercise. So there was a whole industry developed into changing pounds, shillings and pence machines into dollars and cents, and we worked virtually every hour we were awake in converting machines, which of course was an enormous boom to our business, and it took us to a whole new level as far as new machine sales and as far as revenue in technical side of the business as well. There wasn't a lot of preparation for decimal currency. Nobody really quite realised how big a job it was going to be. And of course, one of the other things was that everybody wanted their machines converted first. And in fact, one big company in Sydney came to us and said, we will pay you double if you will do our machines on the first day of decimal currency. So none of us really knew quite what we were handling, but it was an enormous task, and we just couldn't get enough hours in the day. Because of decimal currency and the capacity, we moved down to Abercrombie Street in Chippendale, and we had a larger building there. So it was a fairly rapid growth, especially for a company that had maintained some fairly steady growth from start. So it was a golden era, if you like, for Goodson's at that time. In 65, we had 3 people. In 66, after decimal currency, we had 12 people, and we were flat out. We could have used more people, but of course it was hard to get people with the expertise that we needed for converting the machines. In the early 80s, we did go through a bit of a horror period when the economy slowed down and there was governmental problems. The problem for us particularly was that most of our business was in private enterprise. The government departments had all the money in the world, where the private enterprise didn't have a lot of money to spend. So we did suffer, and that was probably our worst period we went through in our history. The circumstances in the 80s was mainly government problems, and of course subsequently there was a change of government, and there was a new surge of enthusiasm, if you like, and we were then starting to sell our minerals, sell our wheat and wool, and everything started to get going again. And the 90s was a very good period for us. So we enjoyed some good sales and constant growth in what we were doing. And we also had the ability to get new agencies because we were successful. And we were approached by Samsung, a very large Korean electronics company, to sell their cash registers exclusively in Australia. And that was also a benchmark in our company's growth. In 1994, Australia Post decided to go completely mechanised, from a book of stamps and a drawer to a full mechanisation, where they were going to not only sell stamps, they were going to do bill receipting and stuff like that, accounting and stuff. It was the largest retail operation in Australia, in Australia's history. And we were heavily involved. We won the contract to supply the cash drawers and the printers. We worked in conjunction, oddly enough, with the modern day Burroughs company, which is called Unisys now. So we and Unisys put the Australia Post operation together. It was the huge job. At the time we were still at Chippendale, and in fact we had to do the machines in our customs agents' sheds, get them ready to ship out to the post offices around Australia, because we just simply didn't have the volume to do it anywhere else. So we worked virtually in the customs shed to get the units ready and out. We've always had a culture of putting back in to the business and growth. I think most family businesses tend to do that and virtually look at the future as well as today, whereas a shareholder company, of course, is looking to issue dividends for that year. A family business, as ours was, you tend to sort of store away for the future a lot of your capital, and you do grow your capital that way, and that's what we did. So the accountants always tell you should not buy the property, you should just lease it, but again, because of our philosophy, we wanted a steady home for a future and not be at the beck and call of a landlord. We decided to invest in our own property. I think the reason the family succession is important, my father took ill and I took over the company at a time that was unexpected, if you like. So I think I was very attuned to succession, and that was why when I was looking at retiring in 2001, I had both my son and daughter in the business, as well as a lot of long-term professional people as well. So it was something that I was very conscious of, and in fact our bank got me to talk about succession because they believe that we've done it probably as good as anybody. So my daughter now runs the company and runs it very successfully. She comes from a sales and people background. In this business you always need the two areas. You need the technical area and the sales area. And it's interesting that, of course, I had a technical partner in our CEO who is now partnering with my daughter to run the company. And then she also now has children coming through into the company. And the interesting thing is that they've gone into the technical area. So you need both components. But we were very focused on succession. If I was going to retire, that was the time to do it. The reason being that the two golden eras of this business was the decimal currency in '66 and the GST in 2000. Again, we had a very large amount of business. We couldn't keep up with the people that were wanting new equipment, so it was another golden era for the company. And as a result of that, it gave me the opportunity to decide that that was the time to start handing over the reins. One of the things that, again, in a family business is you tend to treat your employees a bit like part of the family. And this happened in our case. Two key people in our organisation came here to learn English from China when the Tiananmen Square thing happened. They were only working for us for 6 months. They were both very, very clever engineers, electronics engineers. Because of Tiananmen Square, and they were able to stay in Australia, they now have Australian families themselves, and they're still with us 24 years later, and their contribution to the business is enormous. So I've always treated our people as almost personal friends. I've had a great relationship with people. Sometimes that's not easy to do nowadays because we're a much bigger business and we're scattered over every state in Australia and in Auckland, New Zealand, but we still do when we have conferences and things like that, when we all get together, we still do have quite a unique camaraderie in our staff, and I'm very proud of our staff. We've done a great job, and we are a specialised business. Point of sale, which is what we do nowadays, is a niche market, and it requires special talents to be a part of it. So our staff are contributing enormously to our business. It's been an interesting ride being in the position I've been, because not only did I see the growth of Goodson's from a very early time, but prior to that, with my father having done the older machines, I've virtually seen almost the whole of the office machine development. I've been through the photocopying, the fax machines, the typewriters, all of the different products that have developed to where we are today. It's a whole new ball game now, of course, because it's all solid state and it's all been brought forward by NASA and the space program, and everything's touch screen and all the rest of it. So it's a different business now, and we are driven by what our suppliers produce. So we don't necessarily have to put a lot of time and energy into development. That's done for us by our suppliers. It's a huge advantage nowadays for the children, because they grow up with all of the electronics goodies. I mean, in our house, if I want to fix a problem with my computer, I get the youngest grandson and he knows all about it before I can even operate it. So one of the things with this business is that we have Susan, who is now running the business, who is very au fait with all of the latest electronics, not only because of her experience, but also because she has 3 sons who are also involved in the electronics era with their games and Xboxes and whatever. So it's all part of their persona, if you like. It's all natural to them. I come in here and glaze over with some of the product we sell these days. It's just, that's when you realise that it was a good time to retire when I did, because it's just gone. The growth is so quick, and one of the things that we do now, of course, is television screens, commercial screens for menu boards or direction boards or whatever. So our business is developing outside of just point of sale. But our point of sale printers now, you have parking officers who attach a little point of sale printer to his belt. When he books you for parking, he can actually print the receipt and give it to you straight away. We produce and sell those parking printers. So the market is exciting. There is so much future in what we do. Our suppliers are clever. We've got people like Citizen Watch Company who are at the pointing end of technology, Posiflex, who are a specialist POS company, and so on. All of the companies we are exclusive with in Australia have this tremendous experience in what they are looking at for the future, and we are there with them.